Alright YouTube, I promised a video on left libertarianism refuting sort of the very existence of this ideal system.
Well, allow me to retort. Libertarianism's become somewhat synonymous with the right wing for a long time, but there's definitely been a shift in politics over the last couple of years from the traditional left-right dichotomy to a more authoritarian versus libertarian dichotomy, and I think this is an important thing to understand. Libertarianism's never been particularly any sort of cohesive political ideology, but it's not right-wing, and it's not inexorably wedded to these right-wing fiscal conservative ideas of laissez-faire economics and so on. It's more of a general approach, and it's not antithetical to left-wing ideas, because not all left-wing ideas, just as not all right-wing ideas, are authoritarian. So it's entirely possible to be both left and libertarian. Indeed, most anarchists, most forms of anarchism can be considered left libertarian, well, apart from outliers like anarcho-capitalism, which you'll find more over to the right. So, I mean, immediately right there, left libertarianism exists. You can argue whether it's viable or not, but it's definitely a thing that exists. But to really understand this and go into a bit more depth, we need to understand both what libertarianism means and what left means. Okay, let's go to good old Roger Scruton for definitions, since that's a standard teaching text and gets respect from both sides of the political aisle. So this definition of left. Now keep in mind that in order to be on the left, you don't have to meet all of these criteria, just most of them. And that'll be important in some future videos I'm going to do as well, to keep that in mind, that political definitions, you don't have to meet every single point to meet that definition. So the left, according to Scruton, is defined by a hostility to private property and a belief in social ownership as the ideal alternative, with control by the state as a necessary means to that. Remember, keep in mind what I just said. A hostility towards all classes other than the proletariat, and particularly towards the bourgeoisie. A hostility towards establishment in all its forms, and towards offices, honours and other symbolic expressions of the dignity of government. Desires for a classless society without privilege, patronage or a hereditary principle. Belief in democracy, or at least in popular participation in government or government by consent. Belief in certain natural rights or human rights, particularly those associated with the aspirations of the working class, together with a desire for social justice. Keep in mind, it's an old book. Social justice actually means social justice here, not what it's come to mean. A belief in progress, to be furthered by revolution or reform. Egalitarian leanings, perhaps as a result of a particular view of social justice. Anti-nationalism, though not necessarily internationalism. Belief in a welfare state and in state control over education, medicine and important resources. That really means more of a collective social ownership. It's just government is the tool for that. So that pretty much covers left-leaning ideas. What about libertarianism? Okay then, libertarianism, according to Scruton. The form of liberalism which believes in freeing people not merely from the constraints of traditional political institutions, but also from the inner constraints imposed by the mistaken attribution of power to ineffectual things. The active libertarian is engaged in a process of liberation and wages war on all institutions through which man's vision of the world is narrowed, some would say focus. Amongst them, the institutions of religion and the family and the customs of social, especially sexual conformity. Libertarianism is not so much a doctrine as an attitude, condemned by some as mistaking license for liberty, praised by others as the new temper of humanism. In economics, a radical form of the theory of laissez-faire, which believes that economic activity must be actively liberated from the bondage of needless political constraints in order to achieve true prosperity. Okay.
Let me explain. No, there there is too much. Let me sum up.
In short, in very, very short, both the left-wing tradition and the libertarian tradition have deep roots in anti-authoritarianism and liberty. If you look at socialism, contrary to popular belief, it actually believes in a very limited form of government. The role of the government in socialism is to act as a guarantor and a protector of the rights and liberties of the people. In libertarianism, the idea is to maximize liberty. You could argue that the state, the institutions, the collective will of the people is a way to garner that maximum liberty. So, right, let's get really into that. So there's basically two forms of freedom. There's freedom from, and there's freedom to. Freedom from, freedom to. And that gesture kind of sums it up. These two are often in conflict. So that if you have a freedom from, that probably necessarily impinges upon someone's freedom to. If you have a freedom to, then that probably necessarily impinges on someone's freedom from. So let's take a couple of different examples and work this through. Your freedom to own a firearm comes at other people's freedom from random gun violence and shootings and so on. I know that's crude, a lot of you are going to disagree, but just go with me through the point. So you want the right to own and or use and operate a firearm. You might be a perfectly reasonable person, okay? But if we had completely unlimited access to firearms, anyone and everyone could get one, any lunatic could get one, anyone could fire them off. So that's if it was completely open. That would be completely freedom to. You have the freedom to own and operate a firearm, carry it in public, shoot anybody you like, whatever. That would be maximum freedom to. Freedom from, on the other side, will temper and moderate that. So if we were to completely protect people from random gun violence and everything else by completely making guns illegal, cracking down on anyone who had them, huge prison sentences for anyone who had a gun, took one out in public, was arrested, happened to have a gun, had their house searched for any reason, had a gun, whatever, that would be completely the other way. What we have in most countries is somewhere between the two. So, like in Britain, firearms ownership is extremely restricted. You're only allowed, I think, 2-shot break-action shotguns, 3-shot semi-auto shotguns. Same for rifles. Only people with certain professions, like veterinarians, are allowed heavier firearms for taking out cattle that are diseased and so on. All that kind of thing. But we allow police and the military and so on to have firearms as part of the execution of their duties. If you go to the opposite extreme, outside of stateless societies like Somalia or wherever, where there's no mode of enforcement available, someone like the US, much more free and open, though it varies from state to state. Some places have open carry and all the rest of it. But even there, you've got some kind of moderation. You've got background checks for certain things. Certain kinds of firearms are restricted and so on. So we're all somewhere in the middle, but some are more towards one extreme than the other. So there's this constant tension and discussion between freedom from and freedom to. But they're both forms of freedom. They're both forms of liberty. Where is the maximum sensible balance between the two? That's a political discussion and a form of tension. To take another example, let's say that someone is the owner of a health food company or similar. So they sell natural herbal remedies and superfoods and all the rest of it. And some of the stuff that they're selling, they make outlandish claims about, that it can cure cancer and whatever else. And lots of people are being taken in by this and they're paying a premium on this product. But it turns out scientifically that it does fuck all. Now in a freedom to extreme, which you find in some anarcho-capitalists and others, they believe that the market will somehow come in and prevent this being a problem. But we know how gullible people are. But still, if we take that freedom to extreme, we would just allow them to sell that. Buyer beware, damn the consequences, doesn't matter. On the other hand, maybe, in order to provide freedom from, we don't want people to be ripped off, we don't want people with cancer given false hope, we don't want people profiteering off others' desperation and so on. So maybe we step in communally via the tool of the state to say that if you're going to make health claims, they'd better be scientifically backed, and before they're scientifically backed, they must be vetted by a team of scientists or whatever. So that would be the other end of the freedom from, that you can't make these kinds of claims without some kind of backing, something to show that they actually do something. So there's your two extremes again. And again, we tend to fall somewhere in the middle, though most societies tend to err on the side of freedom from there. You know, we look to protect people from being ripped off. We look to protect people from being potentially poisoned in their desperation to deal with some medical complaint that they may or may not have. So we tend to come down on that side there, but it ranges all between. And we even have people selling products to say this has no medical effect whatsoever, but in their blogs and so on they have attestations and so on, stuff that really kind of skirts the edge of legality. So these are good examples of freedom from versus freedom to, and that's perhaps where some people see the tension between libertarian and left-wing ideas, but there isn't really necessarily a tension there. Both philosophies are seeking a maximum common level of freedom for the maximum number of people, at least in theory. More traditional libertarianism perhaps concentrates more on the freedom to, while left-wing philosophy traditionally concentrates on the freedom from. Either of these taken to extremes can be terribly, terribly bad. If you take freedom to its maximum extreme, you end up with anarcho-capitalism, corporatism, because there's nothing to stop corporations taking over everything and monopolizing everything. On the other side, you end up with completely state-controlled command economies, which rarely work out well. You end up with a new form of authoritarianism, as it's open to exploitation that way, in the same way the extreme on the other side is open to exploitation by money and power, and so on. So both extremes have their issues, but that doesn't mean that you can't have right libertarianism, and it certainly doesn't mean you can't have left libertarianism. It's a different path to maximum liberty and a different focus more upon freedom from. Freedom from is also what social justice warriors tend to fixate upon, but they're not focusing on real harm, in my opinion. They're focusing on things like freedom from offence. That's that taken to a hyper level, way too far. Whereas most left libertarians, I think, don't take it that far, and that's why you tend to see such a clash between left libertarians and left authoritarians in the form of social justice warriors. It's why people like me, who are extremely far on the left and extremely liberal to the point of ideological anarchism, why you see people like us opposed to SJWs, because they attack and upset our sense of libertarianism in that they want authoritarian control for trivial reasons that don't meet the harm principle, and they offend our left-wing sensibilities because they're setting up elites and forming authorities and seeking to control and command and otherwise violating many principles such as equal universal human rights that are core and key and integral to left-wing philosophy going way back. So left libertarianism will tend to focus more on freedom from, and that's how it justifies things like, say, welfare, because you want to protect people from poverty. You want to make sure they have the maximum chance to achieve their potential in life. So a left libertarian might support a basic standard of state schooling and so on, because you don't want poor geniuses to miss out on the opportunity to be all that they can be. You want everyone to have a reasonable standard of education. You might also support a basic income, because you want everyone to be able to at least survive, so that whatever they do, however they strive, adds to that and increases their opportunities and possibilities. You might want to intervene to protect people from exploitation and being conned and so on. So there's justifications there, but that doesn't have to mean an overarching state. Again, like I said earlier, socialism doesn't necessarily mandate a large state. It has a very limited role in mind for the state as an arbitration, as a protection. And you see this in left anarchism in the form of communalism and voluntarism as being solutions. Left anarchism, perhaps naively, has the idea that if you remove some of these impediments and encouragements to be an arsehole from people, that they will naturally tend to be good. I don't particularly believe that, despite my adherence to anarchism as an ideology, as a utopian vision. Despite that, I don't necessarily agree that people are fundamentally good, but that's the idea behind it. That kind of communal state control can be, well, not even can avoid being a state. It can just be a community, voluntarism, looking out for each other. Personally, I think, at least at the moment, that necessitates some kind of state power to rival corporate power. And that basically, I guess, sums it up. The maximum amount of freedom is somewhere between freedom from and freedom to. But it's going to incorporate some of the freedom from. And that tends to be the province of the left. Left-wing philosophies, left-wing approaches to some aspects of economics, left-wing approaches to the social structure, and so on. And there's little doubt that pushes for things like equal rights, racially, gender-wise, sexuality, and so on, has tended to come from the anti-authoritarian left, the libertarian left. There's really no doubt about it. So whether you agree with these outlooks or not, I don't think there's any argument that the libertarian left exists, and it certainly appears to be viable as an ideology, as a way of approaching the world, and it makes internal and consistent sense. So, sorry Mush, I disagree with you. Sang.